Right, welcome back to Logic. My name is Tom, and today we are going to talk about a new logical connective, which is conditional, if-then connective. So, an example of these kinds of connectives, or an example of a statement that uses this kind of connective, is something like, if I go to the store, then I will get milk. Or to look at the example in the book, they say, if it is raining, then the ground is wet. Okay. These are called conditionals because they're statements that outline a certain kind of condition that will show something to be true. One way to think about conditionals is that they outline something like dispositions or predictions about the way things will interact. Given certain conditions, this thing will happen. Okay. So they are perhaps the most tricky of the connectives that we cover in this class. The first thing that is unique about them is that they are order sensitive, right? So what comes before the then, right? After if and then, you have two propositions, atomic propositions, if X, then Y. Those are play different functions, and it matters what order they're in, right? So the first part is called the antecedent, right? And the thing that follows then is the consequent. Okay, so that's the components, and that's what's kind of unique about a conditional. So notice the truth conditions for conditionals are a little sometimes unintuitive, right? So think about the example, if it is raining, then the ground is wet, right? So the idea here is that if it is raining, then for sure the ground will be wet. But notice, so there'll be no instances in which it's raining and the ground is not wet. However, the ground can be wet and it doesn't have to be raining, right? You used a hose, right? Or you spilled something on the ground, right? The ground can be wet, but it's not raining. But that's not what the conditional says, and this is why the order is important. It says that if it is raining, then the ground is wet, right? So if you look at the truth tables they set up here, it is interesting that they will give instances where, a conditional itself is true even if the antecedent is false, right? So they'll give instances, right, in the example, if it is raining, then the ground is wet. And they say that whole conditional is true if the antecedent is false, if it's not raining, and the ground is still wet. And the example we just went over kind of outlines why that's the case, right? Because it can be wet for other reasons, right? Something else could have caused it to be wet, but that doesn't take away from the truth of the conditional itself, right? It still holds that if it's raining, then the ground's going to be wet, even if the ground was made wet from some other source of water or liquid or something like this, right? And so that's the thing to bear in mind when it comes to a conditional, is that you're talking about the whole thing, and that it's outlining like I said before, a condition, or a disposition, or a kind of prediction, right? If it's 20 degrees outside, then I'll be cold, right? That's a conditional. And that's true even in the summertime, right? It just means that when it turns to winter, then that will be the case, right? And so when it comes to a conditional as a whole is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, right? So my conditional, if it's 20 degrees outside, then I'll be cold, is falsified only when it's 20 degrees outside and I'm not cold, right? Then it shows that kind of disposition of the way things kind of fit together is not quite right, right? So that's the thing to kind of wrap your mind around when it comes to conditionals. And that's all for the most part I want to cover for today. We're just going over the basics of what a conditional is. I do want to mention one other thing about the exercise for this unit. Only if is kind of a tricky one. It's not my favorite. But basically, let's look at the first part of exercise 13, the first number. It says the Tigers will win only if the Indians lose their star pitcher. Only if actually reverses the order of the statements there and puts them into, actually makes the thing following only if the antecedent, and it makes the stuff before only if the consequent. So basically, for this example, the Tigers will win only if the Indians lose their star pitcher is equivalent to saying if the Indians lose their star pitcher, then the Tigers will win. Right? That's what that does. Right? It's just the way we tend to talk, and you have to do a little bit of configuring to put it into the kind of strict logical notation of a conditional, the way that we do it with symbols. So it's a little bit of a trick because it just makes you kind of reverse it and flip it around, but just be aware of it. And after that, it's pretty easy. Just notice if it's only if everything following that is the antecedent, you just got to flip it to the front, right? Okay, that's it. And then after this, we will start to put together all of these logical connectives and see how you make various different inferences around them. Okay, and look at some different specific valid forms of argument. Take it easy.